Welcome back. Something a little different this time. I'm experimenting and practicing with desoldering integrated circuits from various PCBs because I've got one I've got to remove in the not too distant future, and I haven't had a lot of practice at it. So in this video I'm going to try a couple of techniques, and I would absolutely love for you guys to comment, obviously in the comments, and give me suggestions on what I could do better, what I'm doing wrong. Is my hot air gun, is my solder gun, my solder removal gun, is it too hot, too cold? What am I doing wrong? Because I've pulled a few chips out of these boards and it seems to be kind of hit and miss. The vacuum gun doesn't always seem to clear the holes all the way through. Quite often end up with solder left on the top side, which stops the chip coming out. And the hot air gun works nicely, but of course the chip gets toasty hot, which I'm not quite sure how good that is for it. I'm thinking not particularly good. But the hot air does work a whole lot better, so far for me at least, than the vacuum gun. So yeah, most definitely after some feedback. Anyway, let's have a play. So first cab off the rank is a 14-pin dip IC, and I'm just going to attempt desoldering it with the desoldering gun, and we'll see how we go. That one's not quite clean enough. There's that one. They're not quite cleaning out terribly well. Yeah, and I don't think it's blocked. I'll just give it a bit of a... No, it's not blocked. This doesn't seem to be, but there's bits and pieces dropping out of it, so maybe it is. And see that, it fell off, but that's not doing the traces on the board any favour either. So if we have a close-up look at that, and that just looks pretty horrible. Yeah, then it's taken the solder mask off there. I wasn't actually pushing down with any great force. And the temperature is set to around about 450 degrees at the moment, although I have tried it cooler. It didn't really make any difference, but it does look like it's probably a little bit too hot, so we'll go down to 400 degrees. So we'll have a quick go at the one next to it and see what that looks like. It's still not quite. Just hold it down, let the heat transfer a bit. So with the heat transferring, that worked a little bit better. But it also doesn't do any favours to the track. That one didn't. So really, you can only describe what I'm doing as making a dog's breakfast of it. So we'll try a slightly different plan. We'll try putting some fresh solder on the next lot. See if we get any better results. So I'm really after some feedback on all this. So I'm really after some feedback on this, on what people find is the best way of desoldering integrated circuits like this. I mean, this board I'm doing this on really doesn't matter. It's just a board I picked up at the tip shop, literally for doing some practice like this on it. So on the surface at least, it looks like adding some solder first has made a bit of an improvement. And those pins are indeed loose in the socket. Still scratching up the solder mask, but I don't know if that's the heat or just the motion. So maybe I apply some fresh solder to the other side and then revac that and see if this chip's literally going to fall out. Right, so we've resoldered it. Let's vacuum it again and see if that's enough. So we've revacked it. Let's just see if these pins are loose. That one is. I don't think this one is though. Oh, it is now, yeah. They're just superficially stuck, but yeah, you can see we've ripped a trace up here. So that's not great. So I need to improve the technique a little bit. So in theory that should but doesn't. I don't want to force it because it'll, oh yeah, there we go, it is. But we may well have damaged some topside traces doing this. That doesn't look like it, but the chip is out. So that's one way of doing it, I guess. Obviously it works better with the fresh solder, and you're still at risk of delaminating the tracks though. I'm not sure whether that was the initial pass I did at the higher temperature, or whether the temperature's still too high. If you've got any suggestions, I'm all ears. So for the next one, the next approach, I'll just bend this cap out of the way. Put this under here. The next approach I'm going to try is the hot air. And I've got the hot air gun set to about 350 degrees. You can see it in the background there. And the airflow about 75%. So this is kind of fiddly with this chip remover. Really needs some angled tweezers so you can apply the heat without having to work around yourself. And the chip's out. And that has obviously not caused any damage to the board, but the chip is hot as hell. And that's the difference. So the other chip I pulled out, desoldering pin by pin, the chip didn't get anywhere near as hot. So yeah, I don't know whether the hot air method is better or whether the vacuum pump method is better, whether I've got my temperatures too high, maybe the hot air gun is too hot, although the melting point of solder, it obviously has to be higher than that, and that's going to be like, I guess, 300 degrees plus, so the chip's still going to get pretty bloody hot. But then you've got if you're using the vacuum gun, you've got the risk of damaging traces, unless I'm doing something dramatically wrong. I'll start by putting some fresh solder on this. And see how this helps. So I've got the vacuum desoldering gun set to 400 degrees C. Well, that went fairly smoothly. Let's just see if the pins are actually free. And they certainly seem to, those ones seem to be, and those, whoops, they certainly are on the bottom side. See what we've got on the top side. Right, so it looks like we've cleaned the holes out on the top side fairly well. So hopefully this will just, it's still relatively tight in the hole though. And there we go, just popped out. Okay, so that came out fairly cleanly and fairly painlessly, so yeah. So maybe set to 400 degrees with a bit of fresh solder on works. We haven't damaged any tracks, although I was a bit nervous when I was sort of levering it up in case it decided to lift some pads, but it didn't. I mean, there's no doubt the hot air works quite well, but it just cooks the chips. I've taken a few out. Took a few out yesterday when I was just playing around. Took them out with the hot air and put them through the chip tester, and they tested out all right. So on the surface, it didn't seem to damage them, but who knows what the long-term effects on the chip are going to be of experiencing that much heat. So yeah, I'd love to hear your suggestions on the best way of getting these out, because I've got I think it's a 40 pin dip chip to get out in the near future, and I don't particularly want to damage the chip or the board. The board's more important to me than the chip is, but I like to keep both of them because the chip's about I think it's about a $15 or $20 chip, so I don't really want to damage the chip because I'm not actually sure that it's faulty. So that's those two approaches. The common problem I found with the vacuum gun though is you vacuum it from the underside of the board, but it doesn't quite pull all the solder out from the top, so you still end up with the solder around the pins on the top side of the board. Although I've got to say, adding some fresh solder beforehand seems to have assisted with that problem, because this chip came out a whole lot easier than others that I'd tried before. So yeah, I mean, it takes some more practice, but I'd love some suggestions on what works best for you guys. So yeah, feel free to fire them down there in the comments, and I will most definitely be reading them. And I've got plenty of boards here to try and try some of these techniques on. So yeah, have at it. I'll catch you next time.